So I was really happy when I went to my doctor today.
Gives you a nice
black
glow.
Ready when you are, Mr. Chair.
I call to order this meeting of the City of Umatilla Planning Commission on October 22nd, 2024, 6:30 p.m. Please proceed with roll call.
Commissioner Yesenia Leon Tejeda.
Here.
Commissioner Kelly Nobles.
Here.
Commissioner Keith Morgan. Commissioner Jennifer Cooper is excused. Commissioner Carol Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Veronica Gutierrez.
Here.
Commission Chair Bruce McLean.
Here. Pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Approval of minutes. Any discussion or clarifications regarding minutes for September 24th, 2024 meeting?
That we approved the minutes.
I have a motion to approve the minutes, September 24th, 2024. Commission, do I have a second?
I said.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 5.1, introduction of Veronica Gutierrez. I told her she had to have a 20-minute speech for her to tell us all about her, why she's here.
So very pleased to announce that we are finally back up to full strength on the Planning Commission with the appointment of Veronica to position number 3. Just wanted to give her the opportunity to say a quick bit and introduce herself. But we are certainly happy to have you on the Planning Commission. We met a little bit before this, so we're happy to have you here and be part of the team.
I've been 14 years, and I've been raising my family here, and I am very happy to be part of the community and get more involved.
Very much for you willing to be part of this. Get me delighted and really. Okay, must do it. Okay, on to item 6.1. Since we have no deliberation or no public testimony on this issue.
So are you comfortable? I'll just give a quick recap then. So at your last Planning Commission meeting, at the beginning of the meeting, and just to share with the Planning Commission, I did that quite intentionally just because regardless of decision, staff was going to need the extra month to be able to get the findings to the point that they are now. Since then, what we've done, obviously you voted to deny the application at your last meeting. Commissioner Nobles made the motion that we did not have enough information to be able to make a decision. Really, kind of like I pointed out at both of the public hearings, the overwhelming majority of kind of what we're looking at for making a decision as it relates to this transmission line really kind of boils down to about 4 or 5 standards. So if you're looking at just the findings, really starting on page 4, I apologize. What's the big packet number? Upside down now. Page 20 is where we get into really the first of the few, what I would say relevant standards when it comes to siting. So The first one is conditional use standard 10-12-1 site characteristics. This is where I went and put the overwhelming majority of the comments that came in during the public hearing. I think, and certainly I'm also looking for a little bit of verification from Planning Commission on this one because it is your guys' vote in decision. I think the overwhelming majority of the concerns that came up were related to impacts of the transmission line specific to the route that they are proposing versus other potential routes, right? We heard about the prison route on the south side of 730, and clearly there was at least several other routes that were considered outside the city's urban growth boundary that UEC had pointed to kind of high level as not being prohibited due to the EFU zoning. So staff went through and tried to kind of break that down into really the kind of 5 high-level buckets, if you will, of public comment that came in. So that really starts on the next page where we get into, and I did put a whole section that's titled public comment. There's almost a page and a half of what I did as best as I could to try and summarize the main issues that were brought up during the public hearing. So there is a section on transmission line routing. We point to the fact that multiple people brought it up. Multiple people brought up the route on the south side of 730. There were multiple questions raised. Well, why can't we impact EFU? Next, we kind of get into fire and wildfire. So there was a number of issues raised on concerns relating to fire or wildfire, or potential increases in fire hazards due to the location of the transmission line. I tried my best as I could to kind of highlight those ones. Next one is views and property values, right? A lot of folks came in with concerns about views and then how the impact of views would negatively affect property values. That was probably the 2 most common comments that we heard. The other ones, not that there are any, is noise, kind of EMF and health, right? There were several comments that came in around noise and static and potential health concerns related to proximity to transmission lines. So we tried to, as best we could, note that there were multiple folks that brought up health and noise concerns. I did put a point in there on the undergrounding because that was also one of the other questions that came up. It's, the impacts would be significantly reduced if UEC was just able to come in and underground this transmission line. Then we're not impacting the views and probably lesser impact on the values and some of that. The last one that I did want to make sure that was in there because it did come up and there was a couple of comments specific to the wildlife area on the U.S. Army Corps properties and concerns for impacts to the wildlife and birds and some of those types of things. So those were kind of the 5 major categories that we went through or staff went through and added kind of the general summary of what came in through public comment. The next section is where we get into conclusions. So this is where staff went through and took the discussion and from Planning Commission as well as a few others and actually came down to conclusions. So what did we end up finding? So I'll kind of focus on the EFU portion first. So I do want to be mindful that we are not appearing to make a decision for the county. The city has no jurisdiction to be able to enforce or even really kind of indicate what we believe the correct decision would be for that property that is outside of our urban growth boundary, right? That's county's jurisdiction. It would be inappropriate for us to even try and offer a suggestion on whether they could or could not meet that. All that being said, I've provided a couple of ORS sections in here as well as the reference to the Umatilla County Development Code. Ultimately, when you get in and you look at ORS 215, 275, which is where we get into the specific standards for siting of utility facilities necessary for public service on EFU, section 152.617 in the county's code is almost identical to state statute. While they do generally limit the ability to develop transmission lines on EFU, it is not an outright ban, right? It doesn't say that you can't cite it on, but there are 4 or 5 standards that says you have to be able to meet one of these in order to be able to cite on EFU. Based on the applicant's own record, they identified the line on the south side of 730 as being 100% inside the city's urban growth boundary. So we do in fact actually have 2 lines that are inside inside our UGB. And really for the line on the south side of 730, right, we only got 1 sentence in a summary report that really addressed that. They made a couple of comments to it, speaking high level at the public hearings. But again, circling back to kind of Commissioner Noble's ultimate motion and what Planning Commission voted on, Staff does feel it is very reasonable for the planning commission to find that in light of the overwhelming public comment that came in questioning the routing, that a summary report, which is, 10 or 15 pages when it in their own appendix, right, they list 2 full-blown routing studies that we were not provided. Staff feels we are being provided their conclusions and summary of the work that they did, but we're not actually being given the opportunity to go in and look at the routing studies, see what was considered, see what impacts were analyzed, see what the differences are between the individual routes. I mean, to that point, we don't even get a score, right? We know there's probably some sort of scoring metric baked into all of these routing studies, but we don't get to see that. We don't get to see the analysis. So I do feel, based on just that fact alone, that Planning Commission would be justified in denying for a lack of information. So that is really where staff put the majority of our time in. Well, not only have you've all identified in your own material that there is an alternative route inside the UGB. I also pointed to the fact that while state statute and county code would seem to maybe limit the potential for transmission lines to be sited on EFU, it doesn't outright ban it. Right, there are several options that they could consider moving that way, and where we don't have the routing study and the actual data that's in it, we don't have any way to be able to analyze that. We just get the conclusionary statement that we can't go on the EFU route, which, as I've kind of already outlined, is not technically correct in this case. Really, the way I wrote these reports is that's really what we're making the decision on. They didn't give us a staff report. It's not. We don't have the ability to then be able to look at all of that. So we can't make a concrete determination. Are some of the routes out on EFU actually viable or not? We don't even get to see the analysis and some of that, them addressing the state statutes, them addressing the statewide planning goals, right? That would all be in those types of routing studies. And we didn't get a copy of that. Moving down the list, File and Wildfire. I do think that one also has the potential to be denied for not sufficient information. So we've been told that they did done an analysis on the fire hazards. We told that they have a fire mitigation plan in place. We didn't get any of those specifics for this project. So what does a fire mitigation plan? Has that already been approved for this new transmission line? Are there differences in the potential fire impacts on their preferred route versus other routes? Those would all be valid questions. And staff felt that there was not information in the record to be able to address that part of it. Moving on to views and property values. Ultimately, I feel that our standards don't say that they can't impact property or views, which is where we get into it, right? The bar, for better or worse, as the code is currently written, just says they have to have designed it in regards for or considered impacts to views. It doesn't say you can't impact views. It doesn't even say you have to minimize impacts to views. It just says you have to design and consider around it. Based on the fact that they've done renderings, they addressed in multiple locations how they went away from the H poles to single poles, and they addressed how they've moved things down the hill to try and use the topography, excuse me, I can't speak this evening, to try and hide it if you can down the slope as best as they could.
What document are you referring to that says if they can do something different? Is that a statute?
So that is actually our planning ordinance. So if you, I'm just having a staff report. I was trying to simplify. Yeah, so they're both in. So on page 25, it's page 10 of 19 on your packet. The big one.
Is it a statute?
It's a standard that's directly in our code. 10-12-2, standards for governing conditional uses, specifically subsection D, is utility storage tanks and towers for transmission or radio waves for cellular communication and similar facilities. The Planning Commission shall determine that the proposed site is located to best serve the intended use and that the impacts on surrounding properties and appropriate mitigation measures are identified. Such facilities shall be designed and installed with regards to aesthetic value. So that's what is in the city's adopted code. So that one says, yeah, it just says design efforts were made. Well, facilities shall, right? So it means they have to do some sort of effort. Staff felt that the steps that they had taken and the information they provided showed that they had taken efforts to try and reduce the impacts to view. I guess I would look at Planning Commission here since you brought it up. Do does planning commission agree with my this recommendation or the decision that's in the staff report? Because I have addressed those as UEC has submitted evidence into the record showing that they've taken regards for, I think the other one, what is the old county code? Sorry.
It's not exactly a low bar, so they met it.
Yeah,
Is that what
I think
you're
we might
saying?
be, I might be misunderstanding what you're saying, because we don't think they made with them to go beyond that, right?
No, not.
Okay, so I kind of moved on. So I don't think they submitted everything for us to be able to analyze. Okay, so what did you look at on all of the individual routes, right? I think it's fair considering how much public comment we got in opposition to this one and most of it relating to routing of the transmission line. It's fair for planning commission to say, okay, we believe your conclusions in your summary report, but we want the opportunity to actually look at the reports. That is a very reasonable standard to impose. So as we move on past just the routing, right? So now if we're just looking at Wilder Wildfire, again, some of the routing stuff could come into play. If we're moving to the next kind of bucket, if you will, on views and property values, again, the standard just says they had to have made consideration. So in their original application and the supplementary, what do they call it? The initial response to comments, I think was their secondary submission. They did point out that they took several steps, and I kind of just ran through them again to try and minimize the impact to views. To Commissioner Jones' point, it is a fairly, the bar is subjective, right? It doesn't say you have to minimize, it just says you had to have taken steps to show that you knew there was going to be impact to views and you did what was reasonable to try and minimize those impacts. Now, I'm reading that into it. I made the point at the beginning, right? It doesn't say to minimize, it just says you have to design with regards for aesthetic value. To me, to staff, they have met that bar. They have taken several steps to change the design of the original transmission line to try and limit views. So for just the view portion, I would say they have met that bar.
I'm not concerned about that portion. I'm hanging my hat on 10-2-12. This criteria is not how we have to go. And you hope you'll talk to us about that. We haven't had a conversation about how being defendable means you have to address just the criteria. Their attorney addressed it, but we had a lot of talk about a lot of people and a lot of talk. We can't base our judgment on it.
Correct.
You should probably coach us on.
Okay. So I hadn't got to that part. I was going to kind of run through the other things, but that was going to be kind of one of my last statements is staff did not go through and add in the comments that we did not feel were relevant, right? There were several comments made about staff's opinion. There were several comments that were just, we don't like that. That's good for the public comment, but we can't really put that in. So as best as we could, where there were relevant standards that we could tie the complaints that came into, we did. So on that 10-12, the conditional use standard that we just kind of ran through, right? That's where we put all of those findings in there, because I do think you can tie that to the citing standard. And that's how we would ultimately end up getting to the legally defensible portion for adopting findings. I don't know if I actually answered your question there or not, though.
Well, let's have some more. Whatever you're done.
Okay. So the next one is undergrounding. Staff more or less addressed that and by saying, look at, again, it's back to reasonable standards, right? So did they make reasonable steps where UEC does not operate or own an underground transmission line? The city of Umatilla has no underground transmission lines in our urban growth boundary, and candidly, staff is not aware of any within probably a 100-mile radius of large underground transmission mains. Given that is not the normal practice for any public utility facility or company really in our region, staff felt that it was unreasonable to require them to underground. So we found that that was not a valid consideration. The last one that we kind of touched on was wildlife. Commissioner Nobles, I know you and I kind of had a little bit of a conversation about wildlife and some of the concerns. It even was mentioned that there is a specific standard in Chapter 5 of our comprehensive plans that more or less states that the city will take steps to protect wildlife. Ultimately, while the comprehensive plan is kind of the guiding block for the city, if you can't just have policies that are not implemented by code. So why we might have a policy in the comprehensive plan that says we shall take or will take steps to minimize impacts to wildlife and natural areas. I think it's generally what the code provision says. There are no relevant provisions in the actual zoning ordinance that would require any applicant to really consider impacts to wildlife. It's just, that's not typically something we would be dealing with. Furthermore, in this case, the wildlife areas that they identified are on federal property. They are owned, maintained, and managed by the Corps. The Corps would be reviewing their UEC's easement request. That is, as city staff has gone through, that is a multifaceted review that it requires cultural, environmental, wildlife, and all of the rest when you're going across federal property. It is staff's position that if they meet the bar for the federal easement and they are issued the easement, then they have satisfied the concerns related to wildlife. If the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers issues them an easement to construct the transmission line on the property that the wetlands habitat is located on, then the Corps has made the determination that it's compliant with federal regulation. If we wanted to look at, staff doesn't feel that there are any other standards in our code that we could put something in to try and have them look closer at wildlife impacts. Certainly we have some things in wetlands and some other areas which they didn't impact on this route.
I was just gonna ask if they did issue the easement.
So my understanding is it is in review. I took all the conditions of approval out, but one of them, had we approved it, would have been they would have had to obtain that easement prior to starting construction. That'd be pretty typical for us. So that is where the majority of the findings went. We're really into the siting, right? Because that is where we have a criteria in code that says Planning Commission can consider the site and whether that is appropriate considering adjacent land uses, which is a residential neighborhood in this case, and the impacts to those neighborhoods. So that is where staff went in and pointed to based on that criteria as a recommendation to deny based on lack of information in the record. The couple other sections that I'll just touch on real fast. The next two are, I addressed them together just for simplification. It's impacts on the neighborhood and impacts on the community. Again, this one is a little bit harder for staff to be able to address. So, right, we're denying it based on the routing, but we have to treat each individual standard separately, right? So just because we denied it for this, if they still meet all the other standards, we still have to go through and say you meet all the other standards, right? We can't just say, well, you didn't meet this, so we're not going to analyze the rest. To the extent that they could reduce the impacts or negative impacts to the surrounding neighborhood, which in this case would be the Rio Senda neighborhood. Again, the only standards that we have to be able to point to that would require them to make modifications is the view, which again, staff feels that they have met that standard based on the work that they have already done. So we did put in there that based on the mitigation efforts that they already been, UEC has already completed. We do feel if they were able to obtain the easement and install the transmission line in accordance with state and federal standards, that they would be in compliance with those standards. Really, when it comes to noise, fire, EMF, right, there's national utility codes, there's national electric codes, there's public utility commissions. That's not something the city of Umatilla regulates. So it would really be inappropriate for the city to come in and try and impose some sort of higher fire regulation or some sort of higher regulatory design requirements for electrical transmission lines, right? There's federal and state codes that outline how those facilities have to be built. If it is built to federal and state standards, it is assumed to meet all the requirements for noise and health and fire. Does that make sense? Any questions on those ones?
What the question is, you are really good at doing this. We will probably only go through in our lifetime one move of appeal, you suppose we did. But so I don't understand this part of it. Would you say the findings need to address everything? Our denial is this, but we're going to talk about this, and we're going to kind of sugarcoat over the top of what our denial is, because we're going to talk about 100 things and not focus on this. That's my concern. Because if I asked everybody right now in the last 10 minutes, you just said, what was the reason? What was 10-2- that seems to be where we need to hang our hat. Not that we agree on this and we agree on this and we agree on this. I mean, if you have to say it, just say we agree. But I feel like we're getting away from the discussion with all of the things we do think they can get away with. Does that make sense?
Well, so I wanted to mostly make sure on those other ones that Planning Commission agreed with me, right? So on the fire and wildfire, that's my opinion. Obviously, you guys voted. I just wanted to make sure that, right? So it's kind of this weird balancing act. candidly, I probably should have asked a few more questions during deliberation to get some of this back and forth so I could get those into the findings. That'll be something staff will be more proactive about, especially when we have maybe controversial, maybe more just when we have larger crowds and there's going to be more input. The motion and decision went pretty fast, which I get. There wasn't a lot of back and forth. It was, we don't have enough information. And then everybody pretty much agreed from that point. And then there was a vote. Once there was a vote, I didn't really think it was appropriate to go back in and start asking a bunch of questions on, well, why did we vote for this, right? That's not something staff wants to do. Once commission has made the vote, we are going to do everything we can to help support that decision. That's my role at that point.
I think you've done fine, but what we denied it on is not being focused on in what you just told. And the reason I say that is part of when we talk about alternatives, one of the things that they said was that you couldn't extend these, they gave some statutes that why you couldn't do an EFU. Well, there's also statutes that say where you can put transmission lines in EFU. Statute 215.274 and statute 215.313 do say you can't put transmission lines. And I think that, and the opposition brought that forth. They did, but
Okay. So let me stop you right there. So staff cannot insert new evidence into the record, right? So if I went through and pulled the statute and wrote 7 pages on how I feel they do or don't meet that, that's me now testifying for the applicant. That's their burden. So while I get that you're saying, well, we're not highlighting this enough, I think by making the claim that says, look, you have identified one other route that is inside our own UGB that you've already acknowledged has no impact to EFU. On top of that, city staff has called into question, there are considerations for siting a transmission line on EFU. Without the access to the actual routing studies, there's not enough information for Planning Commission to be able to determine if this is a correct route. That's a stop, do not pass go, do not collect $200. We don't have to address anything else.
right.
To your point, right, there are several sections of state statute that get into EFU and when it can be cited, soil types and all of those types of things. And why we get some summaries in the summary report that says that there are high value soils out there, and staff would agree with that. I mean, we've done enough work out there. I think that's generally right. They didn't give us the information to be able to prove it, right? At the end of the day, Planning Commission has to base its decision off evidence in the record. I think based on the fact that they didn't submit the actual routing studies, that is a very easy one for Planning Commission to say, you didn't submit the evidence into the record. We are denying based on that. The fire issues, the noise issues, the views issues, the property values issues. If you would like me to modify these findings, I will. But staff has taken the position that those ones have been met. We are denying strictly based on the routing and the lack of information that UEC provided.
Yeah, so I think I mean,
He has to address all of those.
that's the legal response. You have to go through all of them. I think you were quite right in pointing out that you really the one we can hang our hat on is the route. And the route, in the end, the route being if UEC does provide all of the information and it substantiates their claim that their chosen route is the correct route, our finding will end up being, we'll end up in trouble with our finding. But
yes,
based on the information we had when we made the finding, we were perfectly within our rights to deny. So it's like, okay, does their information that they've not provided substantiate their position, or doesn't it? And I guess in explaining it in the finding, we had a first meeting, we extended because we couldn't require, but we requested that information. And they again gave us two sentences and didn't give us, and on the other side, the people testifying brought all kinds of information. And so that's why, it isn't just that they didn't, there was enough concern brought at the meeting that should have been addressed and an extension allowed, and they still didn't address it. So we got to make sure that it's apparent that they had opportunity to address it, they did not just, we didn't think they gave us,
No, so I do think that we've got there, and maybe this might help kind of close the circle for you. So if putting this application aside for a second, maybe a dangerous place to go. If we assume for a minute that UEC submitted everything that we wish they would have, and I'm just going to wave my magic wand and this is the right route, right? Has the steps that they've taken to minimize impacts along their proposed route capable of meeting city standards? I believe that it is. The question is this the correct route? And without those routing studies, I think we are 100% justified in denying based on solely that issue. Now, if you think some of those impacts are also grounds to denial, then I need to come in and amend it. But I just want to make that clear. Assuming we ended up in appeal or some other sort of situation and there's some sort of decision that says this is the correct route, I do believe that the work that they have done to consolidate into a double circuit to make them single monopoles, that checks the rest of our application boxes. That is how Steph has addressed those. But Commissioner Nobles, to your point, right? We haven't been able to answer the question, is this the appropriate site? So based on the fact that they haven't submitted that into the record. So that was how I addressed it on, let's stick to the one standard where I think we have the most, that is really the standards that's most applicable for all of those consideration. And we're denying based on just that one standard.
Just in short, this is the last thing I said, but my concern is that we make the case, we're writing in our hat, we explained it really well, and not just the bullet points like it does. Because it kind of seemed like this is why, but these will all work. I just want to make sure we're really embracing for them, but that the testimony that was given was overwhelmingly, why don't you do this? And the applicant testimony was nil, and which is exactly what we're saying. But
so I guess my only word of caution on that a little bit is volume of public testimony isn't necessarily grounds for approval or denial, right?
That's what I say. If these statutes they gave were in there, if this statute about 215, they brought these statutes up. This was an opinion. This is statutes, and so in our finding, that's part of what we considered. What they brought in is reasons that you could put transmission lines in the. They said you couldn't, and they gave a statute. The opposition said you can, and they gave statutes. And so I'm just saying it might not be a bad idea to make sure that all of that gets.
So I'm saying that we don't even have to go that far. We just have to say you didn't address it anywhere in any of your submitted materials. It was brought up on the public record. Your own legal counsel mentioned it on the public record. If you didn't submit the evidence for UEC, to your point, right, there are several different things that come into that. There's soil maps. There's a whole bunch of planning that gets involved out in the EFU. I do believe they've done all that analysis, but we needed to see it to be able to verify more or less.
So it really, try to put this down, so it really doesn't come down to anything more than we have the ability to say, I'm not going to accept you telling me that this is the answer. Yeah, I mean, where is your proof for what you're telling us?
Right. I mean, so the standard for planning is sufficient evidence that a reasonable person can rely on, right? Now, high level, if we had nobody show up at Planning Commission and UEC just submitted their summary reports, nobody challenged it, would that have been sufficient? Probably. But where they've called into question, and Commissioner Nobles, to your point, there's a whole laundry list, including the EFU rules, there's fire impacts, there's wildlife, all those. We didn't get substantial evidence to be able, specifically on the EFU and the siting portion, because I do believe that's the one standard that we would have to approve or deny this based on. We don't have the evidence in the record, and given the overwhelming public comment and opposition, I think it's fair for Planning Commission to say we want to verify. We trust you. You gave us a summary report. We want to actually see the analysis that summary report is based off.
Well, goes through city council first.
Yeah, that's right.
Want to go back?
I haven't had a conversation. I mean, my high level conversation with UEC is I do anticipate an appeal. Candidly, for Planning Commission, I anticipated an appeal regardless of what decision you made. If we would have approved, I fully anticipate the community would have been in here to appeal. If we denied, I expect UEC to appeal. We'll see. I guess outside of that, I spent a ton of time on that. Is there any other questions or any other concerns?
I just thought that. So where we're getting here is, I think Brandon would feel better. I would feel better if we, after all of Brandon's work. So for the myriad of issues that were brought up, the good and the bad of Umatilla code is it's pretty darn loosely written. And the good of that is it leaves lots of leeway for appeals and ability to question. The way it's written, like on the, view impact, it's pretty darn easy to, to show that you've done something to address that issue. So just a quick poll, are we good with Brandon's response on this thing as far as noise, fire, view, all those other associated things? The UEC application does meet standards for that. Is everybody?
I just want to say, not only do I agree, but Brandon has done a really nice job of not only putting this together, but he's made it apparent to us that he will change it tonight. He said, I'll make changes. So thank you for your open mind. Thanks for letting us have a lot of conversation. But I do agree.
So anytime you guys have questions on finding, even if it's just normal meeting, staff is always, those are always recommendations. I do my best to try and get us what I feel is give a good first draft and do the analysis, but there are certainly things that I don't know everything about Umatilla. Most of you probably have way more background knowledge on Umatilla. There's things we just don't know. There's things that come up at public hearings. Those need to be addressed in the findings. And if you ever don't agree with me on something, please bring it up. I'm not the be all know all of planning. I do my best to stay informed and try and keep us in good legal standing, but and at the end of the day, like I said, as much as I wrote these, they are the planning commission's findings. I may or may not agree or disagree with parts of some of the stuff that is in there, but at the end of the day, it is my job to write the findings based on what you guys voted for, whether I personally think that was a good or bad or wherever decision. I will always do my best to support whatever decision you guys have made. I will probably tell you up front, like I did at the last one, where I stand, or if you maybe made a wrong decision in my view, but I'll have my opinion, but I will ultimately, I'm very good at following orders once a decision has been made, and we'll get on the right track and get to what planning commission voted on, because you all have the vote, not me.
Well, and I know I've too much thought with this, but there was so much input that all I'm trying to do is make sure they get what they said conveyed in findings. And you were nice to talk to you this afternoon about it. I feel like you made that effort. And I hate for Lula, because Lula's in there anyways. They're just gonna read your finding. So thank you for letting me,
Not a problem. Is there anything else on that one? We don't need an official vote on that, but I guess I got mostly head nods at this point, so I'm comfortable. I will probably bug you tomorrow morning, Bruce, on getting a decision order signed. But
Just for the sake of
Okay.
closing, so are people comfortable with where we are? And we need more discussion?
So just to clarify, so like, let's say there's 5 points they have to meet. What you're saying is they met all of them except one. That's the one that we're kind of teeter-totting about, which is those soil reports and alternative.
right, it's the
maps.
routing.
So everything else they've been met to the best of their, or to the standard of what the city code requires.
Correct.
yeah, and the one thing they didn't do was.
Is what
Consider-
determines
It
yeah.
didn't prove to us that the route is the correct choice.
Yeah.
Right.
And it very well may end up being that is the correct choice when we get all the routing studies in, but it's fair to say based on the overwhelming public comment, we want to see it.
Yeah.
You have no idea what they based it on, other than they're telling us it is on the studies.
Yeah.
So, though not necessary, I'm gonna ask for a motion to accept the findings as presented, and then we'll just do all in favor. So, but I have a motion to adopt, to adopt the findings as written. I have a motion in a second, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
But yeah, I'm not really against it, Stephen.
You can't really do that.
Well, I just did.
The job is to make a decision.
My decision is to abstain. I haven't read, I voiced my concerns. I wanted to see the statute numbers in there. And I don't know that they're in. I trust that he's got us covered. And I'm okay with what he's doing, but if you're asking me to sign the check, I haven't read the check yet.
The motion passed, and Commissioner Noble, just to maybe give you a little peace of mind, both of those state statutes are in there, and I threw in the reference to the county's EFU and citing a public facility, utility facilities also.
I'm interested in your way of thinking. Can I understand why you abstain?
Yeah, I'm still not warm and fuzzy about, I think his findings are great, and I think what his message is good. I just think that the way the picture is being told about why we denied it isn't complete. I think that there's not it's in black and white and it's not in color. And he's saying all the right things, but I don't, I'm just not feeling, and that's why if I read it, I might feel better. The fact that the statutes, we talked this afternoon, and I said those two their statutes are in there, but the statutes that I gave you 215, these two statutes weren't in there. Saying that they can put it in.
So the only ORS that I heard came from Mrs. Sipe and Tommy Brooks. Both of those references are in here. So it's 215, 283, which is uses permitted in exclusive farming zones and non-marginal land counties, and ORS 215, 275, utility facilities for public service. And then Umatilla County Development Code section 152, 617, subsection 27.
Those are not the statutes. She quoted it.
That was the statute.
She said 215. This is her notes. This is what she wrote. This is what she read at the podium.
Okay.
And the statutes that she gave were not those statutes. They were 215.274 and 215.213. And she said, in her opinion, everything hangs on those two statutes. Pardon?
Well, how you said those
How do you
two?
say?
Oh, because those two.
I think you're saying you read that? She read that in? I thought I had all of the correct ORS statutes.
What you stood up to the podium and read, this is their script, and then I recall when you reading this, I called her to say, what were those statute numbers? Because I can't find them, I don't know. So should I send it to you? I said, please do.
So we'll go back through and listen to the recording. I mean, at this point, we've already adopted the findings, so I'm not going to be able to amend them at this point, but we went through the recording. Staff was taking notes. Every ORS or section that I heard uttered, I tried to jot it down as best I could. If I missed one, then I apologize, but.
And I'm not trying to be, when you and I talked this afternoon, I said this exact thing in the statute.
Yep.
And I don't know if you did go with that. And then again tonight, and then just now when we voted, you asked me why I'm staying. These statute numbers, you told me they're run back to me, and they're not the statutes. That's why I'm staying.
Can I refresh my vote?
So if they're captured, they will also capture.
Well, I think when he's trying to say it's not a big difference.
Each single error.
Shall be part of the record, but then they gotta dig into, that's what I'm saying in our finding, we should point out that this is what they said.
What he's saying is that what was put in the record was not addressed, right?
But this was in the record, but
Right, but
it's
it
not in
wasn't
the
dug
finding.
in, it wasn't in the findings that he's
The
talking
findings are the
about.
bullet point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that hopefully they'll go through and hopefully they'll read all this, hopefully they'll look at it. But if they were in the bullet point, this is what we're talking about, then they wouldn't have to do that.
Can we abstain and stay neutral then?
To Commissioner McLean's point, I can't tell you how to vote, but it doesn't do us a lot of good if we all come in and abstain. We don't ever get decisions made. Like, I get it, it's hard on some of these, and I apologize that this is a very large packet and we're getting down to out of the maybe 3 or 4 ORS references, did I miss one, which is sounding like I did. I will apologize for that. But no, my recommendation would not be to abstain. Not voting makes it hard for staff to be able to proceed. I mean,
Yeah, and in 8 years, I haven't ever done it. In another 8 years, I never will, but this is kind of nearing here.
So candid feedback, it would be more helpful for staff if you voted against it and said, because you don't have that ORS in there, then just abstaining.
I'm not against it. I just can't say yes because I don't know that you included it.
Okay. We're going in circles.
If it was a tiebreaker, I would go yes. If you didn't have enough votes, I would vote yes.
Okay,
I'm sticking with this.
I think we're done with that.
Stick to neutral though,
Well,
or whatever the policy says we can say, because I feel the same way, from what I can understand.
The motion still carries.
Yeah, it still carries. And candidly, it's not something we voted on anyways. We just wanted the commission to have the opportunity to review to make sure as best as we possibly could, it was accurate to reflect how planning commission felt. Typically, that's just Bruce signing, and it's typically the chair's judgment if the findings accurately reflect what was discussed at planning commission. We just took this extra step to try and make sure we gave everybody the opportunity to raise issues, just like Commissioner Noble did, if they thought something was missed or not.
But doesn't that mean that if it's not looked into, then that's the whole point, that then that piece of information is missed in the overall finding?
So staff feels just a generic reference to an ORS without providing any additional context, just as somebody in opposed to an application, if I just walk in and drop the correct ORS, that's not sufficient information to allow me to respond. What part of that ORS did you not like? What part of the standard do you feel like I'm not meeting? Is that ORS even applicable? What's the title of that ORS? Those are all valid questions, right? But again, that gets into staff now going and pulling ORS and writing analysis that's not in the record. That's not what we should be doing, right? It came up on the public record. UEC never addressed it. We've already put in there that they didn't address the other routings and potential impacts, and we reference it back to the state statute. And obviously, the ORS 215, and I forget whatever the use is allowed in the EFU, that one's going to supersede all of those sub ORSs, because now we're getting into specific uses and specific citing standards. So staff feels very confident that we have the correct ORS references in there for citing on EFU and utility facilities. There could be additional ORSs that are relevant. There's probably a dozen OARs that are going to be relevant to this. Where there is no evidence addressing them on either side, outside of just a generic reference, this is an ORS that we think would apply. That staff doesn't feel that raises to the level of needing to be addressed in the findings, right? We read it at the beginning. You have to raise an issue with specific that one to allow the defendant to respond. Just saying this ORS.
They put a whole paragraph that says, and what part of the ORS pertains to that ORS in their testimony. So in their testimony, it isn't just dropping the ORS. It was the reason for the ORS. And just, I don't, I think we're beating a dead horse.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's captured in part of the record, as is UEC legal counsel response to those specific ORS.
It just seemed like it would be important to be in the finding.
But I feel like what could end up happening is that could be overlooked. So yeah, it's public record, it's written in there, but if they don't dig into that, then that's where the problem is. That things are not new, but like things are overseen and just dug into, or how do you put it? I can't think right now either. Like left, I don't even know how to say it. Enterrado. Like,
Buried.
buried. Yes,
The issue is that they're not providing all the information that they have on the alternate routes.
Mhm.
That's it. They're not providing the alternate routes. They just say, okay, we did all of this, but they're only providing one route, the one that they want to do, not the other ones that are available. So the denial here is give us all the routes that are available, give us the information, and then let everybody make the decision based on all the information that is available, not just what they want to provide.
And the only information they gave on that was some statutes that said you can't do it EFU. And this is what the testimony from the people to counter what they said, because what they said is not true. It can be done in situations. That's why they felt, and the reason I hammered this so much is because there are a lot of people in the community that don't think the city is bad. And they don't think we're bad. So if they read the finding and they see that we didn't include some of the key points that they had, that they're going to wonder why we didn't do that. And so that's the only reason I felt, strongly about making sure to be their voice. And I'm sorry, I've already talked way too much.
But their voice is that they do not want it, right? That they don't want it. That's their.
Oh, yeah, no, that's right.
That they don't want it.
Yeah.
And our goal is to not have it go forward because they're not providing the correct information.
Yes.
Right,
There's a lot of details.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of in here that I'm I'm not aware of, but to go forward with it based on not only, you know, the community listening to their, obviously we can't just because they don't want it, it's not gonna happen. But also because they're not providing all the correct information for the council to make, the correct decision. I mean, they're only providing what they want, not what is.
And that's why
all
you're
of it,
saying
the
that
entirety of the study. They're not providing the entirety of
it
all
seems,
the routes.
it seems as if they're trying to keep from us the information.
Exactly.
That they have based their opinion on.
Exactly, so
What
they
they're
are
finding-
refusing or denying or, you know, the information that they have. If they would have provided everything in the beginning, and the information would have showed, yes, this is the route that makes more sense, or the route that, you know, that obviously meets all the statutes and all the criteria, then the decision would have been like, okay, whether people like it or not, that is the correct one. But that's the thing is, they didn't give the entirety of the report so that people could, you know, the commission could make that educated, you know, decision.
And that's the key thing, right? And that's why it was extended, because they were told that. And then again, yeah. All right, Brandon, sorry. Back on the rails.
You're good. I guess it's your meeting, Mr. Chair.
So, item 7, new business.
Happy to report there is none.
Item 8, commissioner information and discussion.
I think since we have new member and members, when I started, they had some classes that we could go to. There's a lot of responsibility we have legally as with decisions we make, and things we have to, with conversations we have to, you know, and there's no training for that without training. So, Brandon, we learned about this, you've been so busy, you probably have to keep doing it. Not only that, but some of the things that come out, and he's touched on it. So this whole thing is a good example of when we make our decisions, they have to be defendable legally, which means they can only talk about criteria. Not how many people turned out, not who felt this, not, you know, it's the criteria. And that's why this focus on certain things is important more than other things. But is there some training coming up that we can?
Yes, so with some changes to some ethics rules, it is actually going to be a requirement that planning commission and city council go to an annual ethics type training. That will be coming up soon. I know we are trying to work to get something to actually bring the training to you. We did that, what was it, 3 or 4, probably 3 years ago now, maybe it's been 4. Where we brought in somebody and then we did a whole half-day class with all of the planning commission and city council and ran through kind of land use 101, the pitfalls of making decisions. We're probably going to look to maybe not do a full half day, but when we do that, when we have to do the ethics class and bring everybody in, we're going to probably try and add on some sort of planning stuff as well. The other one is we actually just missed it. Well, we were going to try and bring back another just larger planning, or there's a couple of planning commissioner trainings, I cannot speak today, that are coming up here this winter that we could make available to the new. Typically, we only do that for new commissioners, and then we try and get on a 2 or 3 year kind of bring somebody in for the entire group. We're a little bit behind on that, but part of that was we've kind of been waiting to see where the state's going to land on the required training and just add it on, since we're going to have to bug all of you on ethics training anyways.
Well, I know it's a decision, because we don't have to hear that stuff. So
Yeah,
we
you
can
guys
write
sent me
it down.
4 ballots, that was really helpful.
Then one last question, if you will, and then we'll shut up, I promise. Would you explain to us again, the importance of us using our city email? Because I don't even know.
I don't even have access to it.
Well, we got to the next one. That was going to be my next one. So we do have new laptops for all of the planning commissioners. So if you have a Surface or some of the older ones, we will be getting you upgraded, which hopefully that will help. I mean, they're all look just like this. You'll be getting an identical one. I'm actually upset because this isn't my laptop. It's this council chambers laptop, and I'm still on a Surface. So you guys are all getting laptops before me. But we just need you to get in and set up an appointment, and you can reach out to my Nancy, or Nancy Sandoval would actually probably like it if you reached out to her directly. She manages all the IT stuff. She would like to have you guys come in, set up a time, turn in your Surfaces. She can then take the one-on-one time with you to run through how to get logged into the laptop and make sure we can get into the city emails. But we are obligated to send the notices to the city emails. If you'll notice, I've stopped sending them to the personal one. So if you can't get into that account, please let me know. That is how we kind of have to communicate with everybody. But the other part of that is if I'm sending stuff to your personal accounts, if we ever get a public records request, congratulations, we're now going through all of your personal emails, which I'm sure none of you want. So let's keep it on. So, right, that's just the kind of caveat. It's anything where we're sending information to could be subject to a public record request. So it's just easier for, it's easier for everybody involved if you're just using the government email for official business.
I had it set up on my iPad. They wouldn't do it on my phone because it's like my phone's more of a personal.
I don't know how to get into it. Nancy set it up and then it went wrong.
Just so everybody knows, well, maybe I can do a little bit of showing.
When does she want it in there? Like,
They're all there, they're all in, they're all installed, set up. I think they all have your accounts and everything loaded. It should be fairly easy to get in and get done, but you just anytime this week. I know it's a little bit madness with trick or treat and everything else, but she'd probably have some time for a half hour here or there.
I'll just email her and see.
Yes, please coordinate with Nancy. Please give her consideration. Don't just show up.
Yeah.
Please consider her and email her, call her, and just set up a time. That way you get undivided attention.
Isn't it pretty much our name at umatillacity.gov?
It should be your first dot last at umatilla.gov now. I just lost what I was going to say. Must have not been that important.
November agenda.
All right, now I don't think I have an application, so we are looking like we might not have a November meeting. Assuming nothing comes in this week, technically we could still send notices out next week and get something on the agenda, but there's nothing on my radar. So we are likely looking at no planning commission on November. We never have one in December, so it might very well be January before the next time we meet. Commissioner Nobles, you are the only one whose commission position is expiring just based on terms this year, so it expires in 2024. I'm very much hoping you're going to want to reapply and continue, but we do have to post that and do the announcements and everything else. We'll probably look to do that in November, but just wanted to give you the heads up that
I need one line to reply to.
Yep, you can I can send you the application form or you can submit it online, just as easy. I can send it to your personal if that's easier.
The last question, if I could, just for fun, we deny, the city denies the application that we talked about, and it's supposed to be it. And Luma says, no, they get to do it.
Planning commission denies.
So how does that look for us? Do they fine us? Do they give us holding order? Do they, anybody time
well, without getting into specifics, Luba more or less has 3 decisions that they generally make. They can confirm a decision, meaning it all goes there. They look at it, they say, yep, you guys did a good job. We're confirming your decision. Great work. The other one, and probably the most common, is a remand, meaning they've gone through and they've identified some error. Sometimes that's a big error, sometimes it's a little error, sometimes it's just an administrative action. Something, or you've misinterpreted state statute. This is actually what the meaning is supposed to be, those types of things. So typically on a remand, there's no penalty for the local jurisdiction. What typically happens there is Luba will put out a judgment listing the however many items that they found issue with in the findings, and they will remand it, which means it then comes back to the locals for consideration. Now, that functions not quite like a brand new hearing, right? We're only limited to what came back on remand, so we can go and sort through those 4 or 5 issues and then make another decision, and it kind of starts the process over. A reversal is the one where there can be some financial impacts, right? So if you make a wrong decision or just vote based on purely emotion when clearly they met all of the standards, right? That can be a reversal. Typically, the prevailing party on a reversal is entitled to lawyer fees, which is where it can get expensive for a municipality if you make a decision that is not legally justifiable and they flat out reverse it. Almost in my experience, typically that applicant is gonna turn around and come after attorney fees, which depending on the issue and time, I mean, it could be that, it could be upwards of a couple $100,000, depending on how many lawyers and times, and I mean, how much money you're spending on it. Right, and some of that is it's their lawyer fees, you don't get to review it, they could have went and hired $1,000 an hour lawyer, and they racked up the time trying to win, and they did, and they got the reversal, now you're paying for that.
Right. Yeah. You have the city, it's on them, not on us. They're upset.
So in a remand, does that come back to the city of Umatilla or does that come back to the Umatilla Planning Commission?
Typically, that would go back to the city of Umatilla, since it is a planning commission action, we would take it back to planning commission typically first. Since that's where it's kind of started, right? If it gets remanded, we'll say, okay, here's the 3 things we got to fix. And then we more or less redo this whole process, just focusing on those 3 things. And then hopefully we get to a legal
How much
decision.
Luba appeals have you seen in your career?
I have skated on any. We've had a couple file where we had to send stuff in, but they were ultimately withdrawn. We've never actually had to go through the entire determination. Candidly, it is a pain for staff to get there's a reason we were very thorough on logging every single letter and everything else, because that is mostly a record appeal. They're going to want to see everything that came in. But it's, it shouldn't be a lot of work to planning commission, candidly, right? Most of if there isn't a LUBA appeal, most of that's on staff. It's just, it takes staff a lot of time to go through and get everything numbered the way they want to, get every exhibit and attachment and everything else. It's just, that can, especially with the record this large, that can be time consuming on staff. It's not that it's necessarily the be all end all.
So the record is closed, nobody can add additional testimony.
Correct.
So UBC has been unwilling to provide the route study to this point. If this ends up at LUBA, can they submit the route study?
That's a good question. Do they give an opportunity to provide it?
You guys are getting outside of my area of expertise here. Well,
So I guess
no.
So step 1 would be, could they provide that information during the appeal to the city council?
There you go. That's
I believe so.
They should be busy.
So if they, right, so we denied based on the 1 standard, based on a lack of evidence. If they appealed and said, based on the summary report, we felt that that was enough evidence, but here's the 2 record surveys, that is a possible outcome. But to your point on LUBA, no, generally LUBA is going to look, did they make the right decision? So they would look at it and just using our example, right? Is there sufficient evidence in the record to be able to make a decision? Typically, they're going to give preference to the locals if it's not a clear or deliberate violation. And like I said, in this case, I feel like there is enough wiggle room here that I think planning commission is well within their rights. And I think LUBA would uphold that it's unreasonable to ask a planning commission.
Really?
But no, I don't think there's not a, right, LUBA can't go in and change findings just because, right? So what wouldn't happen is it goes to LUBA, UEC submits a bunch of new information, and then they make a completely different decision. They will go solely based on the record. So that scenario you just brought up, UEC couldn't submit stuff at LUBA. They are limited to what's on the record.
They can't do it to the city council? Is the record open to the city council?
No, it's closed. It's based on the record.
So,
Might get interesting.
yeah.
Might, I didn't even understand.
So, hey, you guys, I suggest we put a little jar together. Brandon has to drive all the way to Hefner every night. He uses the gas money.
Well, item number discussion items.
On a bright note, we have a new park opening next week, right?
Yes. Big announcements. If you are in town this Friday, come on down, check out Trick or Treat on Main Street. It's going to be, well, that's why we're not able to be in the council chambers right now, because it is in full transformation mode. May or may not be under the sea, but it's looking awesome in there already. They always say that. Bring it on.
That's, they are.
The funny thing is, you'll have to go.
Yeah.
See for yourself.
There are several businesses that take the decorating contest very seriously. Banner Bank, the school district, city, there's others, but yeah, there are a few that go all out. Yes. So please come out and enjoy that. And then I'm trying to get my calendar out. There is a ribbon cutting next. Do you know the time even? I want to say it was 4:30. For Nugent Park, so the new pavilion is up, all the new playground equipment is in, all the fall protection is in. My understanding is they paved and got the curbs and park.
Yeah, 4:30, Tuesday the 29th. Got it, gotcha.
Perfect. Tuesday, the 29th at 4:30 at Nugent Park, will be a new ribbon cutting for the park facilities as well as the new pavilion. It's exciting to see some of these projects finally get completed. We also did the groundbreaking on the business center last week, so that's exciting to finally see that moving forward. I know the contractors are itching to get moving. You'll probably see trailers and construction fencing and all that kind of stuff showing up within the next week or two. So exciting, lots going on at the city.
I think to keep on that in the southeast, gonna start throwing things at me. Bridge update.
Bridge is on pace. We're still anticipating a late winter completion. We'll probably do more ribbon cutting, groundbreaking stuff in the spring when the weather's a little nicer, but right now we are on track to get substantial completion done. I know they were getting all the walkways and everything in, so it's actually starting to look like a bridge and not just a bunch of steel beams and everything else. So it's coming along. There is still quite a bit of site work and some other stuff that they'll be doing for a little while, but I think the majority of the bridge work is more or less completed.
I will tell you that the trail got derailed last week. The DOT came back to us, our engineers told us $6.4 million for 10 miles.
Mhm.
The ODOT used their own engineers to critique our engineers and double check and their engineers who did 64 projects didn't come out and look, said that our project would be 20+ million instead of 6. So that's $1 million a mile for that's $2 million a mile. Actually, we're only going 2 miles. It's $10 million a mile. And Dan Dory told ODOT to take their money back. We're going to tell them funds. No, thank you. Well, he did it for tomorrow. Then we had a whole discussion about, we're gonna pay money to have them use our engineers to critique their, because ODOT's got to write the money, but they can't fund it if they don't have a budget that's funded.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that Dan was saying that just to get their attention. But he's also an election here, and he doesn't want his contingents to ask him why he's spending $10 a mile for a footpath.
Yep.
So he's got to live with being a commissioner too. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I mean, I think I made that comment to the group, just knowing what our bridge costs. Granted, they're different bridges. You guys don't have utilities on there. I mean, that was really, and I know you've asked the city to take a look at taking over it. I think that's where our concern is. Just bridges are very expensive.
Well, the point again, in our engineers, we're not getting into the repertoire. We're doing a footbridge on salt. We're not putting land use in. We're not in the. So how can you base costs on, you don't even come look at the terrain? So I think it'll come back and focus.
Yeah.
Right now, it's the river.
That's too bad to hear.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I need a motion to adjourn this meeting and send the planning commission. Oh, no. I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is approved. This meeting of the City of Umatilla Planning Commission is adjourned.